that have joined us tonight. So we'll do some introductions here in just a moment. But first off, just wanted to say welcome. So this organization's put on by Viva Farms. And I guess before I get into that, I have just a few things around Zoom, and a couple features that we just want to mention. So this workshop is being interpreted into Spanish. We have simultaneous interpretation that's being offered by Washington State University, our partners. So if anyone needs Spanish language, you can listen at the bottom by clicking on the interpretation button, and then you'll find the Spanish language channel. And I'll go ahead and just say that en Spanish. Podemos ofrecer interpretación en español por el taller de hoy, y si alguien ocupa escuchar en español, puede elegir como al fondo de tu pantalla interpretación, y puede elegir el canal de español para escuchar en español. So also just want to mention the chat function. I know many people are probably familiar with Zoom generally, but there's a chat. So feel free as we're going on, if you have any questions or any comments, feel free to just put something in the chat. Anna Chotzen from Viva Farms will be monitoring the chat, and we'll make sure to address anything that comes up there. There's also a function that you can raise your hand. So if you have something to say or you want to kind of jump in, there's a raise the hand function that's in the reactions button down below next to interpretation. So feel free to do that if you'd like to speak. And then, if you're up for it, feel free. You can change your name. I know many people here have their name in the title, but if you're from a farm or you're from an organization and you are so inclined, you could put your farm name in your name as well. So if you click on the button with the three little dots in your screen, there's something at the bottom that says rename that you can edit that name. So just a few housekeeping things. Just wanted to say, welcome again to everyone. This is a workshop that's being offered by Viva Farms in partnership with many of the partners that are on the call this evening. As well as a partnership with the Transition to Organic Partnerships program from the USDA, or the TOP program. And so we're happy to be able to offer this. We really want this workshop to be conversational. It's not the kind of thing where it's just a presentation, and we really would like conversation and participation, because we have a great opportunity to hear from some people who have a lot of experience working in the organic landscape on a national level, and we're hoping to have a conversation around understanding sort of why organic, where is organic currently, where have we been, where is it going, just really kind of an exploration of sort of the context for organic, and everything that means, especially in a changing landscape. So I guess without any further ado, I would like to welcome our presenters. So we've got several presenters, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves. But we've got Steve Ella from Ella Family Farms, also representing the National Organic Coalition. We've got Nathaniel Siemens from Rodale Institute. And we also have, from National Organic Coalition, we have Abby Youngblood, who's supporting. Thank you all for being here. And finally, Mauricio Soto from Arado Farms. We're in the same room here doing this together. So maybe if it's okay, maybe I could ask folks to kind of introduce themselves and sort of maybe a little bit of your your story relative to organic, and sort of like either personal story or kind of organizational story, and yeah, and kind of where you are in this in the landscape. So maybe I'll just call on Steve, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Sure. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. So Steve Ela, I'm a fourth generation fruit grower in Western Colorado. If you think of the state of Colorado with the Rocky Mountains down the center, we're on the very west side, the very unpopulated side of Colorado. But my family's grown fruit here since 1906. Of course, in all those years, we've grown probably in every which way possible, but we were conventional more recently, and then started conversion to organic in 1994, and then became 100% organic in 2004, and we've been 100% ever since. We primarily grow peaches, pears, apples. We do a lot of direct marketing at farmers markets. We also do some wholesale. We have a commercial kitchen on the farm where we take our off-grade fruit and process it into various artisanal value-added goods like applesauce or jams or dried fruit. Just trying to find ways to make use of everything that we grow. I also work on the side for the National Organic Coalition. I had served on the National Organic Standards Board, which we'll talk a little bit about in a little while, for a 5-year term. And once I exited that position, then NOC had an opening that I applied for. And so I've been working for a year and a half or so with NOC, and I'm in charge of helping submit comments to the National Organic Standards Board on behalf of our members. So full-time farmer, and then also, I guess, an organic advocate on the side.
Great, thank you so much. Nathaniel, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Rob. So my story is actually pretty similar to yours, Steve. Family's been farming in California for quite a while, since the turn of the last century, so 4 generations or so. We have gone through kind of the various crop cycles in California. I think that my great-grandfathers were farming wheat here, and then my grandfather was farming potatoes, and then my dad was farming cotton, and then I started doing almonds, which is kind of those are all kind of sequential of what you would see in the Central Valley of California. So I'm in the Bakersfield area of California. My side job is with the Rodale Institute. I'm an agronomist with Rodale, so I consult farmers and help them to transition to organic. I cover the entire West Coast, Baja up to BC, and I'm up in Viva's neck of the woods pretty often. We just opened a new regenerative organic center there, and we've got a lot of work to do, a lot of really interesting things that are new to us, new to Rodale. And Rodale's kind of on the other side of the spectrum from Steve and I, where they've been organic since, oh man, the 40s, and it's a very old organization, or old organic organization in kind of the U.S. context, and been doing lots of field trials. They've had their hands in publications and all sorts of stuff. And these days we're mostly focused on research and transmitting that research to farmers. So we kind of see ourselves as an organic version of extension of kind of the land grant university extension services. So and I've been with Rodale for about 4 years now. So that's my deal.
Great, thank you. Mauricio, you want to introduce yourself and your story around?
Hi everyone. My name is Mauricio Soto. Thanks, Rob, for the invitation. I'm a farmer here at Viva for the last 10 years, growing 4 acres of mainly berries. We've been up and out and down with the amount of acres. We concentrate on berries mainly. It's been a good experience. Just have some notes from 2022 on the National Organic Panel on Sacramento. I think I remember Steve and a couple others. Yeah, it's just a good opportunity to be here, and facing those challenges really helps having teams that helps, like interpreters and universities like here in Washington State, WSU, incubators, places, and agronomists from the sources where we can get the material for organic. It's been a lot of help. I would say in my situation as an immigrant, I grew up in Mexico, growing coffee and bananas, bangos, totally different. And then the transition to see different crops and then organically, it's been a challenge, but acceptable. And all the education I've been getting through the years, like right now, it's just helpful. Thank you.
Mhm. And you all have been certified organic
We
for a few years now.
Yeah, I think my
Yeah.
situation is like many hunters. You hesitate first, you relate too much sometimes, and a lot of help. One of the challenge you have is the language. So without the help, I think many people like me will be not certified organic. So it took us like 8 years to finally, okay, I can handle this. I think it seems lots of time, but at the same time, it's like it gets confused, but it's a good effort by the end. I think small scale like us makes more sense to do organically than conventional. Yeah, that's my opinion. And it's been just great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. So yeah, and so we're gonna kind of set the tone here in a moment. We're gonna kind of talk about just kind of a brief presentation on sort of how organic certification, sort of how it works and like who's involved, and not on the individual farm level, but sort of on like the national level, just so that we're able to kind of help kind of frame things a little bit before we get into our discussion component. But Bonnie, do you want to mention the?
Yeah. Hey everyone. I'm Bonnie. I am one of the site managers at Viva Farms in King County in Woodinville. And yeah, like Rob mentioned a little bit ago, we really want this to be less of like, this is a panel of experts disseminating information to everyone else, but like have it be a bit more collaborative and really be informed by what all of the people who are attending this panel are interested in and like what you want to know about. So I think Anna's about just put a link to a Google Doc in the chat, and we're hoping that you can take a few minutes while Steve is presenting about some of this like historical context about the organic movement. If you could take a moment to drop any questions that you have, any like skepticisms that you have, just like anything that you've been thinking about or want to know about in relation to organic certification. And that can be about some of these more like, the point of this is to talk about why organic, so it doesn't have to be about like the technical aspects of organic certification, but can be a bit more ideological. So yeah, we really just want to have input from you all from the start, so that can really shape how the conversation goes. And with the caveat that everyone should feel free to jump in with questions at any point during the discussion. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. So yeah, so I'm just gonna queue up. Oops, put the right one. Perfect. So yeah, Steve, I'll let you take it. Just sort of brief context here for when we talk about organic certification on a national level and how we can kind of just be on the same page, a little contextualizing things.
Yeah, and I appreciate this. We're just going to give kind of a whirlwind background on organics, and I want to say and echo kind of what Mauricio said. He said we started organic in 1994, but it probably took me. I came back to the farm full time in 1990, and it took me probably 3 years to get over the hurdle of thinking, oh, I should become certified, and actually starting the whole process. So I think that hesitation and trying to figure all out is very common and normal for a lot of organic growers. And it was just great to hear Mauricio in Sacramento talk about all he's done and all his family has done. I think it's a great story, and it's one that's shared pretty widely in the organic movement. But let's just give a little background of what organic is. And I think we all often talk about organic so often in terms of what you can use and what you can't use, and what practices you can use and what practices you can't use. I think it's important to remember that it's really more than just practices and materials. It's kind of a whole philosophy of how we treat the land and how we approach growing food. And so at National Organic Coalition and initiation of a lot of the organic movement, a lot of us use kind of the 4 principles that the International Federation of Organic Agricultural Movements kind of laid out. And these 4 principles are care and fairness, ecology, and health. So how do we care for the land? How do we care for each other? How can we grow food in a manner that sustains us and is fair to all people? How can we protect the environment and have a system that actually builds the environment rather than reduces the environment like many conventional systems? And how can we have health both for the land and for ourselves as people and for our communities? And so those 4 principles are really kind of the fundamental tenets to me of what organic is. And anytime we get into a discussion of even materials or practices, I think it's always good to go back to these 4 principles and say, how does this fit? Does this sit well? Does this make sense? Is this kind of where we want to go into the future? So if I could have the next slide. So in the United States, organic agriculture has gone through a lot of permutations and changes. But before 1990, there were many different separate state and private organic certification programs. When we first started certifying, we certified through the state of Colorado, which it had its own program. Washington State had their program. There were private programs like Oregon Tilth or CCOF and any number of others. And each of those programs had their own standards. They had their own set of materials you were allowed to use. They had their own practices. And while there are often a lot of similarities in them, there were also differences. So I used to get really mad that growers in Washington State could use certain things that we couldn't use in Colorado. And they probably got mad the opposite way, that just because of differences between the programs. And while that was great and very locally based in many cases, it also really was difficult for buyers, or if you're going to export goods or have import goods or just move things out of state, to have an understanding of what actually certification you were using. So did the Colorado standards make any sense to a buyer in Washington if I was going to ship something, or California, or vice versa? And so the organic movement went through a lot of trials and tribulations, but ultimately decided to approach Congress and USDA to hold the organic label within the United States Department of Agriculture. And after a lot of work, in 1990, the Organic Food Production Act was passed, and that defined the word organic and gave the basis for the national standards. It also legally gave the use of the word organic some status that you could not use it legally if you were not certified or if you didn't meet certain exemptions. And then in 2002, the full organic regulations went into effect. You might ask, 1990 to 2002, 12 years from when Congress passed the Organic Food Production Act to when we actually had standards. What was that gap? And the reality is, anytime Congress passes something, then it's up to the agency to actually make the actual rules that apply. And so it took 12 years for USDA to actually make the rules that we all work under today. And some of those were open to public debate. For example, USDA proposed that we might allow biosolids, or we might allow irradiation or excluded methods into organics. And that was open for public comment. And we're going to talk about public comments more. But those public comments were overwhelmingly, in fact, they received the most public comments ever about a topic on that biosolids should not be used, excluded methods should not be used, that irradiation should not be used in organic standards. So it's one illustration where we all as an organic community have input into what the organic standards look like and how they affect us. And since 2002, we've been under USDA. The standards continue to evolve, and one of the ways they continue to evolve is, if you go to the next slide, is it's a partnership between the organic community members, all of us, the National Organic Standards Board, which is a citizens advisory board to USDA, and the USDA National Organic Program. And all these, the National Organic Standards Board meets twice a year, and on the topics, and they help decide what synthetics can be used in organics. They help decide, give input on organic practices. You've all heard about the strengthening organic enforcement regulations that are coming into effect. That went through the NOSB. But before their meetings, those twice a year meetings that the NOSB has, they ask for public comment from community members. And that's going to be coming up. There's a spring meeting of the NOSB in April. In March, we'll have a 30-day public comment period on all the materials they're working on and other things. And so it's a real opportunity for us as organic community members to help influence what the organic standards look like. The Organic Standards Board then gives its advice. It's an advisory board to USDA, and then USDA is in charge of making the actual rules from those advisory recommendations into what we actually see as the organic program. So if I go to the next slide. So the National Organic Standards Board really is the conduit between all of us as an organic community and USDA. And it is an advisory board, so it doesn't make rules. It just advises and recommends rule changes. But it's 15 members who are appointed by the Secretary of Agriculture, and 4 of those seats are reserved for farmers. Other seats are reserved for environmental advocates, consumer advocates, certifiers, scientists, people who process and handle organic products. So it's a very diverse board. And when I served on it, it was just an incredible bunch of people that served on it. And I can say I learned a tremendous amount just sitting in that seat as a farmer. The NOSB does review and add materials to the national list of allowed and prohibited substances. So when you're working with your certifier, and can I use this sulfur? Can I use oils? Can I use a certain mineral input? Those all come from the national list if they're synthetic substances. If they're natural substances, they're allowed to be used unless they're specifically prohibited. For example, nicotine and arsenic are actual natural materials that are prohibited in that list. So the NOSB makes recommendations about the organic standards, and it really is, as I said, the conduit for all of us to give input to how the organic standards should look. And that's one of the things that that the National Organic Coalition, which I work for, really does. So if we could go to the next slide. So the National Organic Coalition was formed as all this rulemaking was going on to create what we know as organic standards now. And the reason it was formed is it's a coalition or alliance of 14 member organizations that are working to advance organic food and agriculture and ensure a united voice for organic integrity. NOC is composed of certification agencies. We're composed of farm agencies. We're composed of retailers. We're composed of education groups. We're composed of other non-governmental organizations like Beyond Pesticides or Consumer Reports that help influence a lot of things beyond organic. And so we, as a coalition, we work as a voice to work with the NOSB and to work with USDA and to work with Congress on ways to continue to protect the organic standards and to make them better and to create improvements as we go along and see things that we can do better. So just to finish up, I'd like to say, as an organic grower, we hear regenerative a lot in the news right now, and we say organic is a regenerative system. We believe it has the potential to address multiple crises facing our society, whether it's health and human health, environmental health, such as soil erosion or environmental contamination from toxic chemicals or PFAS materials. And it's the only federally regulated level that requires the use of climate smart practices. All the other labels are voluntary. If you're going to be an organic grower, you have to build soils. You have to look at things in environmental and human health. And the important thing is to remember, as much as we love organic, it's not perfect. We have warts. There are things we can do better, and there will always be things we can do better. And one of the mantras of the organic production is continuous improvement. So how, if we have something that's not ideal, how can we make it better? And that's where your input into the National Organic Standards Board and USDA makes so much difference, because as growers, we're the ones on the ground. We see the issues, we see the problems, and our comments to the NOSB really have a lot of power about what makes a difference. I just want to finish up by saying, I think, again, we oftentimes get bound up in organic being certified as a lot of paperwork and a lot of having our hands tied as to what materials we can use and what we can't use. And I know personally, as an organic grower, when we moved from conventional to organic, at first it was like, okay, I have to fill out these forms. I can't use these materials, I can use others. But for me, it's been a transformational experience in how I think. And I no longer think about my farm as I'm going to solve this one problem with this one thing. I think about my farm as a whole system, and that system includes consumers that I sell to as well. And then, so if I have a problem, I'm going to look at it from a very holistic systems approach. And I think very differently because I'm an organic grower. And it's also really created a community of people for me that whether meeting Mauricio or meeting others anywhere, finding your organic grower, there's instantly something to talk about and instantly something to learn back and forth from. And so I think that's been for me a real benefit of being an organic grower beyond just marketing and beyond just, my farm is certified. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Rob.
Great, thanks for that, Steve. So we're gonna get into our sort of Q&A portion of the workshop, and yeah, really appreciate that context, because a lot of sort of what we'll be talking about and some of the questions we have are going to be kind of around like how it all works and how producers can see themselves as part of the movement. I mean, there's a phrase I know that I've heard a lot about organic as a movement, and I think like sometimes the paperwork part and just sort of like checking the box and the inspection and like the nuts and bolts in a lot of people's experience can sort of occupy a lot of the mental space, and so kind of helping to frame it a little bit more as a movement, I think is helpful, and something that continues to be alive. It's not something that happened in the past, but there's like ways that it will continue to improve, and so thank you for that. So yeah, just a reminder that that doc that Anna shared in the chat, if anyone has any questions you'd like to add, like please feel free to just drop them in there, or you can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand. But we have some questions for our presenters that we've prepared ahead of time, and so we'll go ahead and do those. And yeah, like we said at the beginning, we really want this to be conversational. So if you feel like you have anything you want to add, just feel free to jump in, and I think we'll get the most value out of that. So so I guess, yeah, maybe I'll direct this question toward NOC, the National Organic Coalition, first, and then we'd love to hear from Rodale as well. So yeah, being that Steve mentioned that there's this framework of there's advocacy, there's the National Organic Standards Board, there's USDA. I mean, there's a lot of work going on. What would you say is kind of the current state of affairs in organic or regenerative? Sort of what are current issues in organic that are happening at that level? And then also, if you could speak to opportunities for farmers themselves to participate in that democratic process.
So Rob, I'm sorry, I had another call in the background. Could you
That's
just give
okay.
me a quick rundown on that? I
Sure.
apologize.
Yeah. Just sort of like what are sort of current hot topics within organic advocacy, I think, and sort of what are conversations that are happening at the NOSB level, and then how might farmers see themselves or participate as part of that democratic process.
Thanks. Apologize for that. The phone always rings during a webinar, you know,
Yeah.
but so I think, yeah, there's a number of things that are hot topics. Right now at the upcoming meeting, there's actually going to be a pretty big discussion on compost. So many growers use compost, and the discussion at this point is right now for organic compost, you can only use natural feedstock. So if you're going to make a compost, you can only use natural materials going into it, with the exception of newspaper. It's the one synthetic material that's allowed in organic compost. But right now, there's a petition to the National Organic Standards Board to allow compostable materials like your paper, your compostable plates or forks or spoons, bags that you see out on the marketplace, to allow those as feedstocks into organic compost. And that's going to be a real debate because the organic community over the years has always used what we call the cautionary principle, that we want to use as few synthetics as possible. And we're very wary of what is often contained in synthetics in terms of what can contaminate our farms, and coming back to health and environment. And so this is going to be an issue the board is going to be debating. They're going to be issuing some of their materials that they're looking for public comment in the next 10 days or so. And compost is going to be one of those. And that's where you all, as you make compost and as you use compost in your farms, can really give input back to the board of saying, I think this is a great idea. We should use compostables and have an output for them, or, wow, these are synthetics that might have plasticizers and other chemicals in them that beyond just the plate that could actually not be good for my health or good for my farm. And that's going to be a big debate. Another one that's going to be potentially coming up for rulemaking is on nitrogen and what nitrogen products you can use on your farm. Organic has always been based on using, maintaining or increasing soil health, cover crops, composts, manures, these kind of long-term carbon inputs. But there are more products on the market now that behave more like conventional fertilizers. There are ammonia extracts that essentially mimic like anhydrous ammonia. There are nitrates, and those things generally don't promote good soil biology, or they don't provide diverse soil biology. And so there's a proposal to limit the use of those high nitrogen fertilizers to only 20% of crop needs, and actually prohibit ammonia extracts. So those are kind of very visceral topics. The NOSB also, every synthetic material that's on the national list has to be reviewed for every 5 years to see if it should stay on the list. It's not a given that once it's on the list, it should always be there. And there are materials that, if there's a natural alternative or research has helped us develop better biological ways to do it, we can take those synthetic materials off the list. So some of those materials are sulfurs and ferrous phosphate for slug control, and some of these other things. Sometimes as growers, we say, yeah, we absolutely need this. There are not good biological alternatives. And the board listens to that and says, yeah, we'll keep this material on. And other times we say, we don't use this much, or we have other good alternatives. And then the board can vote to take that off.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I wonder, maybe Nathaniel, if you could speak from Rodale's perspective, sort of what are some hot topics or kind of big issues from Rodale's perspective.
Sure. So obviously, just in the context or in the theme of this particular gathering this evening, transitioning is probably one of the biggest topics nationwide, independent of this, but kind of apropos. So the question that that's being asked kind of in the big picture is what's the best way to transition farmers to organic and allow them to stay in organic. So do you pour government funding towards certification and costs, which is obviously a simple solution that every farmer would be happy to sign up for a grant that got them an extra $10,000 or $30,000 to help with the cost of infrastructure and whatnot. Or do you put that towards training, like this talk that we're in right now is kind of a training centered, education centered support for farmers transitioning to organic. Land access, like Viva's very involved in that, in getting farmers access to land, or marketing, which I think is we all recognize that if there was enough demand nationwide, that everyone would just switch to organic, would get 100% switched to organic if the price of organic, if farmers could get a high enough price. So that's an ongoing conversation that we see as a very front and center nationwide and also at regional levels as well. Out here in California, California has its own organic transition program grant process that is more focused on just getting cash to farmers. So there's very little training involved in it, very little land access for kind of any governmental purview. It's just here's it's like up to $60,000 per farmer to transition. So we'll see where it goes. It's in a pilot. This is just his first pilot year, so we'll see how that works out, and hopefully there's good data tracking and we can test the efficacy of that up against the top program. Another popular, probably our most popular research within most in terms of recent grant funding and just general public interest is probably around nutrient density in organic products. We have a lot of scientists working on that. I'm sure that you have all kind of heard buzzwords, like nutrient density, like population health. And surprisingly, there's not a lot of research around that. It seems like this would have been one of the first things that was people were concerned about, but there's very little capacity or connection, actual real world connection between the healthcare industry and the farming industry, the agricultural industry. So those researchers, if you've heard of people like Zach Bush or Daphne Miller, there's a bunch of good podcasts and books coming out, but not a lot of research to back that up. Not a lot of people have done long-term studies about what does organic practices equate to in terms of population health. But those are coming along. That's where we're seeing some interest. And then the last, actually two more. One interesting topic to especially in the Pacific Northwest is that we're seeing a lot of interest in agroforestry. I'll kind of just leave it at that because it's a whole another way of thinking, and it's it could be its own webinar just by itself. But there's some really interesting research that we're just dipping our toes into on the Rodale side around agroforestry, and those are nationwide efforts too. Things like silvopasture, alley cropping, wild crop harvesting, which is an organic certifiable practice. So those are all kind of up and coming things. And then the last thing I'll mention, which I'll just touch on, is the how to put this, the tension between the organic definitions and regenerative organic definitions. So I'll get the chance to kind of touch on that later, but there's been a lot of conversation about that, especially down here in California, but certainly nationwide. That's probably the most common topic that we're asked to talk about across the board is what is regenerative? How does it relate to organic? Are they in conflict? Are they friends? Are they foes? Sort of thing. So yeah, that's a snapshot of some of the national issues we're seeing.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess speaking of sort of farmer involvement, my next question I'll ask my colleague here, Mauricio. So Mauricio in 2022 was able to attend the National Organic Standards Board meeting in Sacramento, California. And I think as Steve mentioned that the NOSB, they meet twice a year and it moves around the country. I know it was here in Seattle, I don't know, several years ago. And those are, open public events. But Mauricio went to as in his capacity as a farmer, and just wondering if you could kind of share some of your experience and maybe how that changed your perspective a little bit, like relative to how you saw yourself engaging with organic agriculture.
Yes. Yeah, what I'd like to share is my personal opinion, and there is, I don't know how many, several thousands of small farmers, but we are kind of on the same page. Definitely what I saw on that panel is, I think, people from, the back of the desks and people that is, and the other side of the labor. I think we need to, as a farmer, I need to learn more, what's in the other side of the desk. And somehow the people, on the desk needs to kind of learn what the practice are. Because my opinion from that panel is that we need to know, more close what we're doing and what we're targeting. I like the comments of everyone there, Steve and Nathaniel. I think we need to see you guys more often in workshops. Honestly, I think that my problem in my opinion on this on this meeting is, a small farmer usually is a bookkeeper, holds a hoe, sprayer, and all those things. So kind of to accomplish, all the paperwork is kind of hard. But not because we can't. I think we just need to be trained more. The same way, somehow the other, we all one team, but we need to learn more from each other. I think, 2 years ago, I might be talking, off of the topic because it's 2 years ago. And it's just an example. So if you were talking about 2 months ago, it will be more fresh. And then I think many message that, like now, how many we are here, Rob? Like 60? You say 70?
Yeah.
We should be 100 or 1,000. Really.
We tried.
So yeah, I know that's the thing. You try.
Yeah.
But honestly, this is good technology. Someone said there, but we don't reach those people until they have already like 6 or 10 years already, in a smaller scale. But that doesn't mean that they don't need to hear these orientations. When I was growing on 1 acre, if someone invited me here, I would probably ignore. And not because this is bad, this is really good, but I would say, well, I think I don't fit there. I don't understand anyways. So how can we train the people that we're working hard for this transformation experience, just like Steve says, it's really important. Otherwise, we might see the same faces next time. And it's just my opinion, Steve. And I think we need to reach more people. So how can we do that? I think by making more workshops more often. In different, not only Seattle and Sacramento, big metropolitan things. Cities, but small towns, counties, and that's my perspective. I get an amazing info 2 years ago about taking care of the land, but it takes time. It takes time to get in love, to really put those inputs, efforts. It's just a love, I believe, for the nature. I don't think you will do it for money in the very beginning. If you that's our target, I don't think we want to do it. I think we really need to care for what we do, and then experiment yourself, and then just bring it to you. Because one thing is, many people that probably were working in as a store manager somewhere, all of a sudden he's farming. Totally different environment. So he needs to be educated, on what he wants to do. So someone needs to put time on his task. And I'm saying someone, and just one example, but there is thousands of people that wants to do to grow food, healthy food. But some people think it's impossible, and some people try. I've been about to quit. I've been, if it weren't for, because I bought in a farm in Mexico, I'd probably not be here. And I'm not talking, I'm putting me as an example, but it's many people in the same situation. Encourage people probably to, I know what Viva is doing, and many programs, Rodale, the big coalition, but sometimes that doesn't get to the small guys, or even not specific small, but some people say it's just difficult. Yeah, I can keep going, but
That's great.
I think it's a message. I think how can we get more people into, just get to them, get the message, and probably helping, sometimes not really with grants, but with education. And another of my perspectives that I've seen, I would rather get a grant for education rather to buy something that I might end not buying anything and using the money for another thing that I apply. But if we dedicate grants for education, then we be sure that, I think that's the most needed thing that I see around my environment. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you, Mauricio. I think there's this question in the Google Doc that's asking, what do folks on the panel perceive as the most prominent obstacles or challenges faced by both newcomers seeking certification and those who have been certified for years? And I feel like that your response really spoke to some of that. Yeah, I was hearing things about like challenges around getting trained in record keeping, finding time for like the administrative parts of organic, and like being exposed to information about organic and feeling like your farm is like the type of farm that should be present in organic spaces. So yeah, I don't know if you have anything else, Mauricio, that you want to add about just like some of those challenges, as like a newcomer to certification, or like challenges that you've continued to face while being certified.
Yeah, Bonnie, I think I like to say that if we put, more education or dedicate more money that comes from grants and education, I think we'll be better than getting sometimes another piece of equipment. I've been thinking this for years, Steve. Why don't we dedicate a portion of all the grants that are around the country, the country, to pay someone, like let's say 50K or 60, 70. What portion will go down for educators to raise people, and make sure they get something for life, because that education will go for life. I might get a tiller, I might get a tractor. Eventually, I just sell it and go to Mexico. What good does that? It's a simple comment, and it's a simple thing, but I hear similar things. Don't need to say those, but what's the point? You will give grants and you submit it somewhere. Yeah, we did this good, but the education doesn't go anywhere. With education, I would say I will not sell this. I'm gonna stay here. I'm gonna do well, and I'm gonna, by the end, achieve the goals that Steve was saying. Because why? Because I have this equipment with 20 years old, and the education that I get, and now you know what? I'm willing to go to all those meetings that are far away because my education. If you give me just a tiller or a tractor, I'm not go to anyone, because I think without education, it's like oh, this is gonna sound ridiculous, but I think we need to laugh and at the same time really learn what money, what good do the money on the narcos of Mexico without education? Millions and millions, and what's the point? And sometimes with a few amount of dollars, that support your family, you can do a lot of. I mean, your community will enjoy that berry, lettuce, whatever. This come from clean money that these people that is putting the effort. Yeah. Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you to everyone. Hope I don't went out of the topics.
No, that was awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it's great to hear from somebody who is actually certified, like yourself, about what your experience has been. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
If you could just add on to that real quickly.
Yeah, please.
I think Mauricio nailed it on the head. I mean, I know as a grower, anytime I get to visit somebody else's farm or talk to another organic grower, even if it's not about fruit, I almost always bring something back to my farm that I've learned from that person. So just that cross-pollination of knowledge between organic growers of whether it's how you control weeds in your berries or your vegetables, it almost always applies to something I'm trying to do as well. And so I think that education is huge. And I also think in terms of the biggest hurdle sometimes to organic certification is your first application, because it's all new. You don't know. It's like learning how to drive a car. You get into it, everything's new. You don't know how to shift. You don't know how to drive. You don't know how to use the turn signal. You don't know how to fill out, what you need to do. So the first application is the hardest. And then after that, hopefully your certifier then lets you say, what have you changed from that first one? So you don't have to redo everything again. And so I found the longer we become certified, almost the easier the paperwork becomes because we don't have to redo it every year. But that first application it's tough, and there's no doubt. And you need a lot of hand holding, and you hope your certifier is graceful to you. But that education is a big.
I know that
thanks.
and Andrea had a hand raised. If you're willing to share.
Andrea here. I'm from Pasa Sustainable Ag, based out of Harrisburg, and I was actually that question. So Mauricio, if he's still there, gracias, for his input. And the reason why I asked that is so I'm relatively new to the sustainable ag space and know close to nothing in the organic landscape. So I'm super happy to be here. And so the reason why I asked that is so I'm a policy fellow at Pasa Sustainable Ag, and one of my assignments is to create some sort of project in terms of organics. And so happy to hear all of your inputs and bounce ideas off of what you guys are saying. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And thanks for being here. I think that was the only hand that was up. So I'm gonna move to the next question. Thank you to everyone and sharing your thoughts about that. So wanting to move to this question, I think has been talked about a little bit, but there tends to be kind of this general perception of organic certification that I think was talked about in like the intro presentation, that it tends to center mainly around the regulation of no synthetic inputs. I wanted to have National Organic Coalition talk about what are some of the other aspects of organic certification beyond just those input regulations, And how are those standards reviewed or judged and upheld?
So I think we hear a lot about input regulations because those are the kind of the day-to-day, the nuts and bolts things of organic. But the standards themselves, the more overarching standards, are some of the bigger debates, and they often take a long time to have because they're more philosophical, and people have a lot of opinions on them. But the National Organic Standards Board, whether we're talking about input fraud, or fraud from overseas, or whether we're talking about transition or crop insurance, those are all things the board does talk about and that people give input to. And I just want to stress it can be daunting to give input to a national board, but they're people like you. They're people, so they're common citizens. They're all people working in organics. And you don't have to give a complicated comment. Literally one paragraph of saying, I use this on my farm and it's important to me, or this practice, and as we're talking about practices, I approach my farm this way. I look at how I build my soil this way, can really have an impact on how the board thinks, because you're telling them what organic means to you and how you apply it. And then the board can say, oh, we have to make sure and take that into account. And so the standards are always being updated, some more than others, but those inputs into the board of what they should be looking at also, like, I am a grower and I struggle with this, is an important input as well, because it might change how those practice standards look. So those comments to the NLSB and those spring and fall sections are really, really useful, and especially when they come from growers, you all have the best knowledge in the world, more so than any person, any policy person, any person sitting up in a chair. You're doing it, and so your thoughts are very important.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I think also what some of this question's trying to get at is, like, for some of these more place-specific practices, like those surrounding soil health or soil improvement, that aren't so cut and dry in the way that, like, okay, here's like an input that you can't use or an input that you can use. Like, how are those more nuanced practices that are part of part of being an organic farm, like, how are those things reviewed and ensure that those follow organic regulations?
Great. Yeah, good clarification. So
Yeah.
when you fill out your organic certification, the big part is what's called the organic system plan. And the organic system plan is, how am I going to maintain or better my soil? How am I, what inputs am I going to use? And that is up to your certifier. And so you submit that to your certifier, and your certifier can come back and say, well, this part needs a little more detail, or this part actually this isn't actually allowed. And so it's a conversation with your certifier on those nuances, because the cool thing about organic is it's not prescriptive in saying you have to farm exactly this way. It's saying, here are the principles, work within them, do what works best for you. And if you can make the case to your certifier that, yes, this is helping build soil, or this is a biological control of insect, or I've tried this and it didn't work. That's how you get at those kind of specific questions. And it is, and really the organic system plan is very personal. I can, say my neighbor across the street, who is an excellent organic fruit grower as well, our organic system plans may look very different because we have different personalities. And we farm, I'm a little more, I'm not as detail oriented as they are. So they probably literally dot every I and cross every T. And I'm a little more like, yeah, this is kind of what I'm thinking. And so that system plan, you can be yourself in, and then it's that conversation with your certifier to make sure it actually fits the standards. Once you get through the first one, it's a lot easier.
Thanks, Steve. So yeah, and Anna mentioned this in the chat, like looking at some of the questions that have been put in the document or the chat. Some of them are more about sort of like the nuts and bolts of getting certified and the process. And I would just I'll mention this again at the end of the workshop. But so next week at the same time, we're hosting sort of part 2 of this series that's going to be answering a lot of those questions, and we'll have we'll be joined by USDA Organic and Oregon Tilth, sort of on the certification side as well. So we probably won't get to those questions tonight, but I would encourage you to come to the workshop next week if you do have those questions. And sort of pulling back up a question that I'll direct at Rodale initially, but I'd again love to hear from everyone. That, you know, I think one of the critiques of organic that I've heard and is, you know, from producers and also consumers, depending, is that you know, over time, organic has been, you know, watered down. Organic has, you know, been has it been co-opted by, you know, agri industry, greenwashing, like a lot of those things where you know, the organic umbrella has expanded, which is fantastic, I think. But at the same time, you know, companies that are sort of you know, conforming with sort of the bare minimum to kind of check off the boxes, but maybe are not as adhering closely to a lot of the other components of organic that we're talking about. So just curious around, yeah, like Nathaniel, maybe, you know, does organic certification go far enough, or if you could kind of speak to that sort of as organic has expanded and gone, you know, big O, sort of where we're at relative to staying true to those original goals.
Sure. Before I do that, though, I just want to thank you, and I'm hopefully I'll get the chance to do this again at the end. Thank you, Bonnie and Rob and Anna and Viva Farms in general for letting us talk about these big issues. I mean, we're as farmers, as just humans, we're always like just working on the nuts and bolts and the kind of the day-to-days of things. So it's really fun. It's really invigorating to get to think about, you know, these big national issues. So thank you for giving us that space. As per this one, greenwashing, co-opting, all that happy stuff. I have to wonder, like 30 years ago, what this is kind of like the dog that caught the car, right? Like all these old farmers from like the 60s and 70s, we want organic, and they got it into the USDA, and it ended up kind of being a Faustian bargain because now here we are, where Walmart is the biggest purveyor of organics. It's inevitable that we're going to kind of have some regrets as an industry, and it's not just our fault. I think it's also a consequence of decades, generations of USDA policy too, to encourage consolidation across agricultural industries. So now all we have is huge farmers or small farmers. So there's this big small dichotomy with no one in the middle. The missing middle is always talked about in kind of industry terms of kind of missing processing industries, but it's also true of lots of other aspects of our society too, and especially of farmers. So when you have a USDA that's trying to define organic, and they're defining it for a bunch of big farmers and a bunch of little farmers, inevitably it's no one's going to be satisfied, and you're going to be able to throw rocks at it from either side very easily, and rightfully so. So I would flip this whole thing around and say, what is our responsibility to fix this problem? And I think that's our opportunity to be in. This is a democratic process. This is like I said, it's a Faustian bargain. We shook hands with Uncle Sam, and now we're in bed with this old guy. So what do we do now? Like, well, we've got to act, right? This is what it is to be an American. This is the kind of the democratic experiment, is that now we have responsibility to do something about it, and to to take action to work on those definitions. And, you know, back in in 08, the government decided that the banks were too big to fail. Why the hell can't we make that same demand now and say that organic is too important to fail? You know, why not support a reimagining or strengthening of organic, which people always are. And I think Steve, actually, this is the part I think I want to kind of tie this up with is Steve brought up the point of organic is set up, it's defined as an evolution, that we're always trying to improve it. You know, there's that cheesy saying about if it's not growing, it's dying, or something like that. But you know, it's our job as citizens, as organic farmers, to guard against regulatory capture, to guard against co-option, and we have that power. But we need to take that power. We need to be actively involved in our local governance in order to act on that. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
Yeah, thank you. No, I'm not sure if any follow-up from anyone, from anyone from NOC, or any participants, anyone, other thoughts there?
Well, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. The best way to get USDA's attention is to have a lot of comments in their inbox. You know, they do have to respond to people. And so just like, as I said, during the development of the actual organic regulations, when the organic community flooded USDA with public comments, that was important. It made a difference. And so we are always in that tension of big versus little. And but when smaller growers put a comment into NOSB's inbox, when I was on the board, I read those and they had import. And because your comment is as important as a big grower's comment. You know, it's still one individual making something, saying something that's important to them. So I agree. It's a democratic process, and we always fight against big government sometimes, but sometimes that can have an effect.
Sweet, thank you. Yeah, we want to recognize that there's also some of these questions that are really great in the doc, and want to get to some of those. So I'm gonna start, or kind of go in order. Some of the next ones was it's asked from one of our participants, which is, from a policy standpoint, what specific improvements or initiatives would you like to see implemented to further enhance the organic landscape? Which I think is a great follow-up question to this conversation about like what has organic turned into, and like what some of our responsibility as producers to like be involved in that, to be involved in what that landscape looks like. So yeah, and especially this conversation about how it's sort of been set up to be like this. So yeah, I would love to hear either of your thoughts about this potential policy to enhance organic certification.
I don't know, Nathaniel, do you want to go first? Or?
Sure, I can jump in. I really am excited about that policy. I think there were a lot of us who were cheering as that passed, and I think that some I think that any and all doubling down on the requirements of certification are valid, because farmers are already doing that. You know, good farmers are already doing far and above and beyond what the certification requirements dictate. Too, but the consumers are only, you know, they have a short attention span, and they're only they're only there for the value. If they're going to pay more, they need to have a value associated with that. But big but for all of this is that it's absolutely absurd that organic farmers pay extra beyond conventional farmers. The fact that we have to pay money to certify something that's of value to the consumers is just crazy making. And it's probably a long way off till the farm bureaus let USDA just have write a blank check to certifying bodies, and all certifications are free, but that doesn't mean that it's not a good fight to fight, among many other good fights. So I think there's lots and lots of smart people thinking about policy, and I think that this is one that's front and center that we've actually had some wins on. So go for it, Steve. Tag team.
I mean, I agree with that, and I see always the stuff on soils. How can we have healthier soils? What do we need to do to have maintain soil fertility? Biological diversity is always a big one. The other one I really see is going to be seeds. There's the access to organic seeds and local breeding, so that you all have seeds that work best in your environment and that they're organically produced. That's a huge one, because right now, a lot of organic growers don't use organic seeds because they're not exactly what they need. But especially as we see more genetic engineering in seeds and for specific traits, not just Roundup Ready stuff, but actually for micro traits and engineering bacteria, I think the organic seed movement's going to be it's going to be really important. And it's also something that to me is very democratic, because it can be very regional and very specific. And as organic growers, if you grow organic seed and you can give it to other organic growers, boy, what a great way to work against the big system. That's been an ages old way of taking control of your food. So those would be a couple things I see as on the landscape of continuing activism and need for more work. And I would also ask Abby from NOC as well if she's got anything to add on that. But
I was just typing in the chat box as I was listening to Nathaniel talk about the cost of certification and how kind of ludicrous it is that people are paying to get certified to do something that's so beneficial to our ecosystems, to public health, and as wanted by consumers. And I think that would be an improvement to start breaking that barrier down more. I think we're still far away from that, but something that we're working on in the Farm Bill is a bigger reimbursement to farmers to help cover that cost of certification, and other things too, like a lot more money for organic research, which gets at what Steve is talking about. We know there's still a lot of on-farm challenges, and we need a lot more government support for research to help develop new seeds and help farmers adapt to the changing climates and changing weather patterns. So those are the kinds of things that we're working on in the Farm Bill process. With the organic standards themselves, I am very excited that we have gotten some really big, significant improvements in the last couple of years. To one that I'll mention in particular is, used to be, well, still is, you go into the store to buy organic eggs and you don't really know, is the chicken outside exhibiting natural behaviors or not. Well, we've closed that loophole. It's going to take a while for it to be fully implemented, but now there's stronger regulations for outdoor access for animals, and that gets at what we're talking about before, where can you have a really large scale operation that's kind of not really with the spirit of the organic standards. So I think there's a lot of different ways we could strengthen organic even further.
Great. Yeah, there was another question in our doc around, specifically around another issue. Seems like a lot of the organic standards focus on what happens on the farm and not on waste streams that farms create. Especially noticeable in the use of plastic on farm, which seems to be growing exponentially. Do broader sustainability concerns of farm waste factor into NOSB? Is that something that's ever on the agenda? And whoever wants to answer that.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And it's big time on the NOSB. I mean, the use of plastics is something that NOC brings up. The NOSB is talking about it, and we hear about microplastics in our environment and the use of plastic mulch or biodegradable mulches. That NOSB is putting a lot of time and more time into that question. But I think in general, the waste stream from the farm, one of the goals of organics is to not have a waste stream, to incorporate those, what we would call quote unquote waste back into the farm somehow, and whole purpose of composting and green manuring and things. So those ideas are very much in the conversation. And the increasing use of plastic is a tough one, because as we have more climate change, the use of road covers or tunnels or some of these means help mitigate climate change. And on the other hand, they're an increasing use of plastic. So that's a debate that is going to keep going. But people's ideas on that are huge, because we need people that have good thoughts, and the more people trying to work on the problem, the better off we are. And I think the use of plastic mulch, nobody likes it, and yet it's kind of a reality in some systems. But could we help with research, as Abby mentioned, for alternatives to plastic mulch? Absolutely. Those are great research projects. Let's not take it as a given, but take it as, again, continuous improvement. How can we get away from this? And how can we do it in a way that helps farmers?
Yeah, I always thought if someone could crack the nut on plastic waste, and the other one is like packaging, like wax boxes, produce boxes. If someone could crack that nut, they would solve a huge problem and get filthy rich, I'm sure too.
Yep, agreed.
So I know our time is getting short already, which is unfortunate. I did want to ask one question around sort of like the thought around I guess regenerative certification, sort of like alternative certifications versus, I use the word versus, but it's kind of this funny place, right? Like, in addition to perhaps strengthening organic and maybe I know Rodale's in the space of certifications around regenerative, and just wondering if maybe you could speak to that a little bit, Nathaniel, sort of what the relationship between that and organic and how you all see that, and sort of where it's at currently. And that could be the case, but there's other certifications out there, there's sort of these like nascent, like real organic, and there's other ones that people might be hearing about. So just kind of curious if some, speak to that kind of where all that is at in your opinion.
Sure. There's a lot here, so I'll try to just
I know.
distill it pretty tight. But one is, most everyone recognizes that the organic NOSP as it's written, that it is regenerative, but it's largely not there's some really important pieces that aren't being enforced, or that are kind of moot in kind of in practice. Soil health and equity, farm worker fairness are probably the two biggest ones. Animal welfare was a big one, and it still is for some people, certainly. There's obviously recent updates to organic regulations that address that. But for those first two, for the soil health and the farm worker fairness, the regenerative is really kind of captured people's kind of it's this zeitgeist term where people are it resonates with them all across the nation. Brands, farmers hear the word regenerative, and it kind of caught their attention, and they realize, I think we all think of this term as being a solution, like a long-term solution. We want it captures this idea of getting better in a much better way, more appropriately, or kind of more dynamically than the word organic does. So then what do you do with that? So there's a dozen different certifications out there right now, all kind of competing effectively for consumer awareness for farmers to sign up with. There's certifications that don't say the word regenerative, but like the Real Organic Project are trying to say that they're doing more than organic. So it's messy right now, and some people would say that we should embrace that messiness, that's just kind of like, this is the world that we live in. We live in a very a diverse world, and embrace that diversity. Other people say that we should kind of fit this. Some people would say that we should regulate the word regenerative, and here in California we are trying to regulate the word regenerative. So there's all kinds of knockdown, drag out fights because our Department of Agriculture has decided to define the word regenerative. So that puts us kind of like right in the middle of a national spotlight around this. But and I won't go into that other than saying that it's quite messy, and there's lots and lots of opinions on it. So yeah, tune in a year from now, and I'll let you know who survived the fight in California. But other than that, just know that the regenerative is largely brand driven, as opposed to organic, which was always very farmer driven, and that's not insignificant. There's some very real consequences of that, just the nature of where it came from.
And I think that highlights too the pluses and minuses of USDA having the organic label. Is the Organic Food Production Act didn't talk about farm workers and didn't talk about some of these other big social issues that a lot of organic growers embrace and believe in. And so USDA, because it's not in the statute, can't incorporate that into organic, even though we would love to see it. But on the other hand, it is regulated, and it is legally defined. And unlike regenerative or sustainable, back in the 90s was kind of the same way. There is a definition of organic at this point, and it takes a lot of effort to change it. It can't just be somebody coming out with a big PR campaign saying, well, I'm this and I'm better. So it is one of the pluses and minuses of USDA having the organic label, but the shortfalls are that it doesn't go far enough. And that's where regenerative, we would love to see organic be the baseline, and then have regenerative be an addition. But the conventional growers are trying to co-opt that term and use it for chemical no-till. And in my area, that's what people are calling regenerative, is chemical no-till. So it's a real fight.
Actually, can I add one thing onto that? I think Steve hit on a really good point that I'd like to riff off of.
Yeah, go for it.
So Rodale's officially signed on with regenerative organic certification. We're one of the board members of that. We helped to define it, blah, blah, blah. Regenerative organic makes that exact argument that Steve just said, that organic should be the baseline for regenerative. You can't say regenerative unless you start with organic. But the interesting thing to me, and this is like, I'm taking off my Rodale hat to say this, is that it benefits regenerative organic to actually have them separate. So if farmers in the Midwest are defining regenerative in terms of no-till, in terms of soil health in their own terms, and organic has a very different set of perspectives on what inputs should look like, then if you combine those two, in theory, you would actually be getting both camps in the same room together at the same time. In other words, if you want to be regenerative organic, you have to do fully no-till and fully organic together. And in other words, it's a complicated mess, but it's also the words themselves actually, I think, are kind of driving this to a certain extent, like I said at first. So the word regenerative resonates with consumers in the same way that organic has been too. So it's kind of bigger than all of us. It's almost a linguistic question here of you know, where this falls is kind of outside of everyone's uh decision making, because you know, the word regenerative is going to stay with us, you know, for another 300 years, and it's still going to mean getting better. The same thing with the word organic. So it seems like we're kind of trying to fight a glacier to some extent.
Yeah, that's a it could be like 6 other workshops talking about that, or 6 other conversations. Um, yeah, it's such like an interesting thing about how movements and language change over time, and like what people find relevant or moving to themselves to like move them to buy something or engage with a farm. Is so interesting. And it's interesting, like a lot of our farmers at Viva would refer to themselves as regenerative and like following regenerative practices, but that's obviously like uh not necessarily meaning the same thing as what it sounds like regenerative certification or regulations might mean. Um yeah, so it's like this whole question, what's the point of regulating or standardizing things if words mean different things on the ground versus in policy? So yeah, just very interesting topics. But yeah, I want to recognize that we're very close to the end of our set time for this. So Rob put a link to an evaluation for this workshop in the chat, and we would really appreciate it if everyone's able to take a few minutes to fill that out. And while people are filling that out, I'll just ask Steve and Nathaniel, just if you have like a key takeaway or a final thought that you want to share, yeah, to wrap things up, that'd be awesome.
I mean, I guess my takeaway is, uh, as a farmer, being part of the organic community has been just really, it's been transforming. And you know, I've always loved farmers, but it's a really fascinating group of people that are, I think, by and large, not always, there's always exceptions, but dedicated to trying to make farming better, and not just more economic, but better overall, and more economic. And so I think that's just a real bottom line. And you know, being certified, I know one of the issues sometimes with people say, well, I'm organic and farming organically, but I'm not certified. But the devil's in the details. And sometimes it's easy to think you're farming organically, but using things that actually wouldn't be certifiable. And so when you're certified, you know that you're certified, you have this conversation with your certifier. So I think there's just, you know, the paperwork, everybody talks about it. You get used to that eventually. The hardest hurdle is the first one. But then you get all these other benefits beyond just, you know, I can use this or I can't use that. And so I always tell people I don't think I would ever go back to being a conventional grower. It would go against my ethos at this point. And it would go against how I think. So.
The the day I put on my big boy pants and got organic certified was the day that my farm changed 180 degrees. I'd had that, oh, we do direct marketing, we're not going to make any margin from this. Oh, this excuse, I don't have time to fill out an inch worth of paperwork. Those are all good excuses. They're valid excuses. But the day that I signed that over, I wasn't expecting it, but I felt like a different person. Our farm felt like a different place. And at the end of the day, it is more work and it is a pain in the butt, but it's valuable work. This is, you know, this is democracy. This is, you know, this is why we're farming, is to build up our communities, is to provide good food and to do good work. So for those farmers on the call, or those of you who are working directly with farmers, you know, give them a kick, make them do this, and they'll be valued. You know, if you're working in local politics and you're a farmer, I mean, you're a rock star. That people value that. They will be excited. They'll be excited to have you as a participant. You know, we have lots of allies in our state capitals and our national capital, but we don't have a lot of farmers. So yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Oh, go for it, Rob.
Yeah, just thank you for those closing words. And yeah, I think like Bonnie mentioned, we must have been having fun because time flew. So thank you so much to our presenters tonight, Nathaniel from Rodale, Steve and Abby from the National Organic Coalition, Mauricio Soto from Rodale Farms. He had to just take off here a few minutes ago. Yeah, just a reminder that we do have another workshop next week, same time. It's on Wednesday from 4 to 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. Different sort of, going from the big kind of themes and context kind of much down to a sort of nuts and bolts level around how you might choose to get organic, how that works. So if you have any questions, if you're considering that, we'll have like the top representatives from USDA Organic will be in their call, inspectors from Oregon Tilth. So a great place to come and have those questions answered. Please remember to fill out the evaluation. The link is in the chat. If you would be so kind, it's important that we gather some feedback on how things went. And yeah, I guess I would just close this out by saying thank you to our presenters, thank you to everyone who took time out of your evening to participate. We did record this, so we'll send out a link to the recording if there's something in there that you want to revisit at some point. And thanks again to the TOP program, Transition to Organic Partnerships program, that's helping to support this. So yeah, and I would just say generally too, Viva Farms offers workshops throughout the year on a variety of topics. So check out our website, vivafarms.org, if you're interested. And otherwise, I think we'll go ahead and close it. And yeah, I'll leave the message, we'll leave it open. So if anyone wants to stay on or just chat a little bit more, like we can do that, but we'll kind of close the workshop officially. So yeah, thank you all. Again, really great conversation. I wish, we could keep going, but let's do that in our communities, with each other. So
yeah, thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you. You all, it's a lot of work to put these on, and it really does help inform us as well. So the constraints and how we solve these are group actions.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, and thank you, Eber, as well, WSU, Washington State University Extension. Thanks so much for offering interpretation. That's awesome.
Take care, y'all.